The Essendon Football Club had its roots in the mists of time. Its origins are sketchy, but historians point at 1872 as the likely birth date. While the club won the first ever VFL premiership in 1897, we are going to pick the story up some 40 years later. With the help of one of the club's great champions, Tim Watson, we are going to journey from the glory days of the late 30s when the impeccably fair King Richard, Dick Reynolds, ruled Windy Hill, through to the present. From Reynolds to Sheedy, 60 years that filled the trophy cabinets that made young men heroes. This is the story of the Bombers. This is Essendon.
When the greats of Essendon's past get together to chat about the good old days, there in the middle of every gathering is the King. At 83, Dick Reynolds has maintained his marvellous regal bearing.
Look, you're great. Look, thanks very much for everything you've done for me. Thanks to Dave for making this day a happy day for me. And I say, I only hope the club goes on to be bigger and better all the time because it means a lot to us all and all. Anyway, once again, thanks everybody. Good, thank you.
He is the icon whose name and deeds are legendary not only at Windy Hill but throughout the width and breadth of this footballing nation. The Hall of Fame at Essendon might at first glance be a shrine to his deeds, and why not? This was a youngster who won the first of his 7 club bests and fairests in his second year as an 18-year-old, 64 years ago. The same year he won the first of his 3 Brownlow medals. He had come to the club after a brief tryout with Carlton in 1931, played a couple of pre-season practice games, and after being picked for the first game of the 1933 season in the seniors, would go on and play a league record 320 games with the club.
When I was a kid, I was a Carlton supporter. My mum and dad barracked for Carlton, and then we came to live over in Ascot Vale, and it was pretty hard to change over. But I tell you what, if I'd gone to Carlton, I wouldn't have got a bloody game.
In his first season, he would finish alongside Hayden Bunton, tied for 7th in the 10th Brownlow medal to be awarded. The next year, he would beat Bunton by a vote. This was no gala held in a packed ballroom or covered nationally on television.
Well, they rang us up at home and we had to go into Harrison House. Oh, I nearly fell over. Like, you know, I didn't believe I had a show at all. I just wanted to see how many votes I got. And when they announced ringing, oh, the family went mad and they're dancing around there, and I was more or less like a stunned lizard, I reckon.
In 1937 and 38, the newspaper and radio reporters would again flock to his home in Moonee Ponds to celebrate his wins. Reynolds was an idolised sportsman, scrupulously fair, the bloke with the huge heart, who could turn a game.
Dick was one of a kind in our days. He could run fast with his hands on the ground as fast as everybody could standing up. He was a class act.
Big for a rover and very quick, you know, very quick. He was a natural. I mean, they're born, I think. They're not made, they're born that way.
While Reynolds was distinguishing himself on the playing arena, Essendon was languishing down the ladder. Not since the Mosquito Fleet years of 1924-25 had the club known premiership success or in fact seriously challenged the might of Collingwood, Richmond, Geelong or South Melbourne. Early in the 1939 season, Jack Baggott, the former Richmond forward, stood down as coach, claiming to have lost the confidence of his committee. Into his place stepped the 25-year-old Reynolds and former player Harry Hunter. In 1940, Reynolds took over as captain coach. It would be the beginning of a sensational decade for the Bombers. That year they would play in the finals for the first time in 14 years, finishing 3rd. In 1941 they would lose to Melbourne in the grand final. This would become a familiar sight to football fans in the 40s. The Bombers lining up in the official team photo. This time at Princes Park, Dick Reynolds, front and centre, and in 1942 and 43 he would toss the coin with the rugged and feared Captain Blood, Jack Dyer. Dyer, the roughhouse tiger, and Reynolds, the dapper Don. Mortal enemies then, today adored by the football world. In 1981, they were side by side on World of Sport.
I think you're lucky to win a Brownlow medal. Honestly, I never thought I'd win 3. I hoped to win 1.
So did I, Dick.
Yeah.
Dick Reynolds, it's lovely to have you here, and as I said before, I'm very sincere when I say one of the greatest footballers that I've ever seen.
Anyway, thank you, Jack. You've been great, and I do appreciate for all the years, the fun and the... Well, we used to hate one another. No?
Yeah, but you told me if I gave you a push-up, you'd push me up. That's all right.
Two men who would stand together as they were inducted into football's Hall of Fame in 1996 as inaugural legends.
In that time, Dick was, what would he be, 27 years of age, and he was still in his prime. He had won his 3 Brownlow medals, but it wasn't only in the grand final, the lead up to it. Any game we were in desperate trouble with, out had come Dick. In the last quarter, kicked that 1 or 2 goals that you needed to spur everybody on.
The 1943 grand final was a spiteful affair. In the closest playoff for 22 years, it would be decided by a kick. After finishing 3rd in 1944 and down the ladder in 45, the Bombers came back in 1946, topping the ladder with 15 wins. Among their newcomers that year, a kid named Bluey McClure.
I didn't know that I was in a team till on the Saturday morning. And my mother came up and they said, you're in the football team today. And I said, oh, yeah. So anyway, I had a look and they said, yeah. So I thought, well, I better get out to Brunswick Street. So anyway, I got out to Brunswick Street there, and of course that was a crummy old ground at any time, Brunswick Street. And I walked up to the gate and I had my kit bag in my hand, and I went to go through the gate, and the bloke said, where do you think you're going? And I said, oh, well, he said, where's your ticket? And I said, I haven't got a ticket. And he said, I said, I'm playing. He said, oh, I can't help that. He said, I'm not going to let you in. And he wouldn't let me in the gate. So they had to go around to the Essendon rooms and tell them I was out the gate, and no, they wouldn't let me in. So someone come down there and felt out I was telling the truth, and that's when I had my first game.
They would meet Collingwood over successive weeks in the second semi-final. The first was drawn, the replay a thriller. On the Collingwood side that day, Lou Richards.
Of course, no one knew what to do. I said to Dick Reynolds after the game, after the bell rang, not the siren, I said, what do we do now? Dick said, I don't know. I'd probably toss, see who won. And the following thing, the funny part about it, the next week we played in that match, a replay, and three-quarter time we were dead level again.
Essendon surged ahead in the final quarter of the replay and would meet Melbourne, led by Norm Smith. For the Bombers, it would be the first of 6 grand finals in a row.
46, we had Casson and Abbott and Bushby and all those, seasoned players. And then we had players like Bob McClure and Tetley Hayne come back from the war, Harold Lambert came back from the war. And I joined the club. That was in 46, and we just went from there, you know.
At centre-half forward, Whopper Lane would be sensational, kicking 7 goals. This was a Bomber blitz. The third quarter netting 11-8, the highest scoring quarter in a grand final. The final score of 22-18-150, the highest ever in a grand final. For Reynolds and his men, their second flag in 5 seasons.
It was unbelievable. And they said to me, what do you think? I said, I felt like I was a traffic cop. I was just guiding them on down our way. I said, they did, like we just got the ball anyway, anyhow, and seemed to go on there and was, well, you couldn't, I don't think we had any opponents at all that day.
To the club in 1947 came Norm MacDonald. Tied to Geelong, they relinquished him without seeing him in action. He would become one of the greatest half-backs in history.
Norm actually dropped his age 2 years to join the paratroopers. He was 16 and he got in as 18, played brilliantly at Darwin. He was invited to go to Geelong and Essendon, but he, through Dick Reynolds being his idol, he came down. And how did he come down here? He came down with a pair of boots wrapped in the brown paper bag. He knocked on the door. They said, we can't have you. And he handed the invitation. And that was the start of Norm coming here to Essendon.
47 was a season studded with injuries to key players, topsy-turvy form and what many these days would label a premiership hangover. Carlton was emerging as the power side, and it would be the Blues under West Australian Ern Henfrey who would start grand final favourites against the reigning champions. 85,815 people packed the MCG, and this documentary produced for the Australian National Football Council showed Aussie rules at its very best.
Accuracy in kicking is essential. From a scrimmage, this player breaks from the pack with the ball and, taking careful aim, although running at top speed, kicks a goal from an acute angle.
Essendon's kicking was erratic. The scoreboard at half-time told a sorry tale. The Bombers 8-11-59 to Carlton's 8 straight goals. In one of the rarest recordings from the day, this was how wireless listeners heard the Blues and the Bombers doing battle. 3KZ's Jack Green.
Behind 80 points Carlton, 85 Essendon, as Baxter goes back to take this kick. It's a lofty punt kick going right across goal, pack going towards Bushby, punching the ball away, little all racing in, and Essendon out of way.
In the last quarter, Essendon had led by 2 goals.
Kicking was terrible, but we were in front all day long, and we had a Stafford on the half-forward flank for Carlton. Hadn't had a kick all day. When I mean hadn't had a kick, he probably had 3 or 4 kicks. And he kicked one over his shoulder from about 50 yards out and sailed through, and we didn't have enough time to win the game back because the siren went about 20 to 30 seconds later.
Listeners, there's the bell, and Carlton has won by 1 point.
Blimey, 1 point. We was robbed. Yes, madam, but it was a great game.
If you thought that grand final was tight, stand by for 1948. The very next year, Melbourne and Essendon would meet. Don Cordner and Dick Reynolds tossing for the ends. This time, nothing would separate them. This would be the first drawn grand final in history. Essendon kicked atrociously, just as it had done in 1947. The final scoreline showed 7-27, of which Bill Brittingham kicked 2 goals 12.
He wasn't a full forward, but I mean, I had great admiration for him because he was the only one who would go there, and he'd play anywhere you liked him to play. He'd play on the half-forward flank, and as you know, he went to the full back, and he was a wonderful full back.
The next week, they met again for the 5th time in 1948, and this time Melbourne would have its first victory. McClure was again brilliant, but this time in a 39-point loss. So, in successive years, Essendon had lost by a point and then drawn a grand final. 50 years on, in May 1998 at the Melbourne Cricket Ground, many of the surviving members of the 1948 Melbourne and Essendon grand final sides were presented to the crowd prior to a match between the clubs. Melbourne's Dr. Don Cordner, the 1946 Brownlow medalist representing the Demons. Dick Reynolds there with his teammates on behalf of the Bombers.
And the disappointment of 7-27 the week before with Melbourne. They started off that well, they caught us unawares and they went on and we plodded on. I suppose to win 1 out of about 4 they had to do it.
While many would reminisce about that game all those years ago, one man was missing. The man who would step into league football in 1949 and in less than 100 games become one of the biggest names in Australian sporting history. If errant kicking had cost the Bombers the premierships of 47 and 48, then that problem was about to be solved. In the opening round of the 1949 season, the 20-year-old John Coleman ignited the imagination of every football fan when he kicked a dozen goals on his league debut on Easter Saturday against Hawthorn at Windy Hill. 12 goals, 2 in fact. Deadly accurate. Just what Essendon had dreamt of.
He was a freak, yeah.
Well, his marks, I did see Bob Pratt in the earlier years play, and I didn't think I'd ever see anybody that could mark as high or higher than Bob Pratt, and John Coleman was the fellow.
Coleman had been a Moonee Ponds boy, educated at University High before moving with his parents to Hastings. He had tried out as an 18-year-old in 1947 and again in 1948. The players tended to ignore him, and it wasn't until this was driven home in an article by the doyen of football writers, Alf Brown, in the Herald, that Coleman was finally given his chance. The high marking was spectacular. The goals came at an amazing rate. The fans idolised him. While Coleman was kicking goals, the Bombers had slumped to 8th mid-season. Then it clicked. In the days before television, newsreel footage conveyed the expectation on Grand Final day, as 90,453 crammed into the MCG. There were no booked seats, first come, first served. It would be Essendon and Carlton, just as it had been 2 years earlier in 1947. Coleman had gone into the game with 94 goals. No player had ever kicked 100 in his first season of league football.
Nobody realised till he played that year and 1950 just how pacey he was. Outside of his brilliant marking and so forth, he had a turn of speed. Wouldn't be out of running in a stall gift.
57 points up at three-quarter time, the flag was in Essendon's hands. Could Coleman kick the 4 he needed?
Time was running out. It was a matter of make sure he got it to get to the 100, you know.
I looked around everywhere and he darted out and I was like, he gets it. And he got it and put it through.
The Bombers would win by 73 points, the greatest margin ever in a grand final. Bluey McClure, outstanding in the ruck, was best of field, as Essendon became the second team to win the flag from 4th place. The fairy tale end to the dream season. An hour after the game, Coleman was still trying to leave the Essendon rooms. In 1950, Essendon lost only one match to North Melbourne at Arden Street. It was the greatest season in the club's VFL history, with only Collingwood back in 1929 matching the feat. In July, Dick Reynolds played his 311th game, breaking Jack Dyer's record and becoming the game's longest-serving player.
And so the stage is set. Just on 100,000 people are ready to witness the 1950 Grand Final. So big is the crowd, they're on the oval. They're sandwiched between the fence and the boundary line.
This would be the year that North Melbourne made the Grand Final for the first time. North Melbourne would meet Essendon. Coleman had topped the century mark against the Roos in round 17 in front of his home crowd. There would be no last-minute rush as there had been the year before. Melbourne's champion of the 30s and 40s, Percy Beams, wrote in The Age in 1979, "Only the Melbourne team in 1956 would come close to being on par with this talented Essendon lineup." He pointed to Bluey McClure in the ruck, Chuka May, the half-back line of Harold Lambert, Roy McConnell and Norm MacDonald, the game's best rover, Bill Hutchison, its great spearhead, John Coleman, and the veteran Reynolds, not to mention Dale, McEwen, Syme, Collins and Chris Lambert. This was a mighty side. On Grand Final day, though, reputations meant nothing. After a brilliant 7-goal opening, that quarter-time lead of 21 points was eroded. By half-time, Essendon led by 13 points. Coleman had been heavily dealt with. Rain had made conditions difficult, and in a slogging third term in which Coleman kicked 2 goals, the Bombers moved 20 points ahead. Coleman's 4th for the match was his 120th for the season, and with a lead now 32 points, Essendon had secured back-to-back flags. For Dick Reynolds, this was supposed to be his final game, after 17 years, 319 games and 4 flags. He had captained the club for 224 times, a record that would stand until Steve Kernahan overtook him in 1997.
Well, I would have played for him if I could. But I was one of those blokes. I felt that, you know, when I had the team and I don't know, I just seemed to have the confidence in them that much that I still felt that I was better out on the field with them, telling them and chatting them and telling them to pick up their man and things like that.
Waiting to take over was Bill Hutchison, the perfect replacement. The game's top rover, a triple best and fairest winner and regular member of the Victorian side. Into the side would come recruits of the calibre of Jeff Leake, John Gill, Lance Mann and an 18-year-old named Jack Clark.
I can't remember in my life anything else but the Essendon Football Club, in that I started there when I was in the thirds when I was 13, and Essendon you expected them, and they did, play off in just about every grand final at that era.
Essendon had slumped early in 1951, then came back brilliantly. Again, the club was looking ominous. In the last home-and-away match of the season, tragedy struck. Coleman was reported for striking Carlton's Harry Casper.
I heard a roar in the crowd and I turned around to see what it was. And I just saw Coleman having a whack at Casper. And the umpires raced in and this was just before half-time, by the way, so he moved off the ground, not thinking there was a great deal in it, and I didn't really know he was reported. So when Coleman got into the rooms with the rest of us, and as he was walking up the race, and it was at Carlton, someone spat at him through the cyclone mesh wire, which he just went berserk, and you can imagine that, but it wasn't a very nice act, and he wasn't in the best of mind at the time. He lashed out at this face that was spitting at him through the wire and cut his fist on the cyclone wire. I think we're all pretty incensed. In time we got in there, we believed he was reported, so Coleman took his Guernsey off and hurled it into the ground and said, look, I'm not going out and playing with those mongrels again. He said, I'm not going to put up with that. So Dick, who was coaching, Dick Reynolds coaching, and the chairman of selectors took him aside and they took him in the corner of the room and they talked him back into going back and playing in the second half, because he really wasn't going out there. He was really upset. We know what temper he had.
Look, John, I said, if you don't go out there, they'll call you a bloody squib. I says, you've got to go out there and you've got to ram it down, and he did.
In the starting moments of that third quarter, he took this classic mark. He took off from behind the pack, went over the top of it and landed in the front, took a mark and kicked the goal. He did that twice. And Ollie Grieve was Carlton's full-back at the time. Ollie was a very good player and a beautiful kick, a very handy full-back, and Coleman just produced this magical form out of nowhere because he's been reported.
Coleman and Casper were both suspended for 4 matches. The champion forward so upset by the decision, he contemplated quitting football. With Coleman sidelined, Essendon struggled. In the first semi-final against Footscray, they got home by 8 points, John Gill kicking 2 goals. Lance Mann and Chris Lambert sparked a huge revival in the preliminary final against Collingwood, and when Chuka May flattened Bob Rose and Brittingham took care of Lou Richards, the Bombers were fired up. In a thrilling finish, Jack Jones kicked the clincher, Essendon by 2 points in one of the great finals. A spate of injuries had left the club in trouble. In one of the shocks of the season, Dick Reynolds announced that at 36, he would sit on the bench alongside youngster Jack Clark for the match against the raging favourites Geelong. 20 points down at quarter time, the Dons were struggling, but by half time they had crept in front. A goalless third term by Essendon and a 22-point deficit spurred Reynolds to come off the bench.
And Dick went on at 3/4 time, much to my sorrow. In fact, I reckon if I'd have gone on instead of Dick, we'd have won. And that would have changed the record. But I finally got on in the last 10 minutes when someone came off to give me a run. I think it might have been Les Gardner.
The final margin to Geelong would be 11 points, and the arguments raged. Just how far Essendon if Coleman had played? 1952 would be the wettest season since 1930. Coleman excelled, topping the century for the 3rd time with 103. 30 goals in the last 3 games as Essendon missed the finals for the first time since 1945. Years later, Jeff Leake recalled the way Coleman marshalled his forward line.
Coleman was the captain out there and directed the traffic at the forward line and did a great job. And it was just like having an insurance policy against losing, and that's how good he was.
Bill Hutchison would tie for the Brownlow with Richmond's Roy Wright. Although Hutchie lost the medal on a countback, nearly 40 years later, in 1989, his widow Nell would receive the game's most cherished individual award at a retrospective Brownlow presentation.
Yes, a tremendous performance, and come on, Dick, time for the presentation. This can be number 2.
Oh, no.
Isn't that great, Nell?
I'd say there'd be a photo finish between Bill Hutchison and Hayden Munton Sr. as the best rove I've ever seen.
Can't get a bigger rap than that, ladies and gentlemen, can you?
In 1953, Coleman would kick 97 goals, missing his 4th century when he battled flu and a tough Footscray defence in a losing first semi-final side. This was the year that the 30-year-old skipper Bill Hutchison would receive his recognition. In 1953, the All-Australian rover and Victorian captain won the Brownlow medal by 4 votes from Collingwood's Bob Rose.
I used to sell footy records outside the ground, and when I went in and watched Hutchie play, he couldn't kick. You know, people can't believe that he couldn't kick because he was such a great deliverer of the ball at the finish. But he literally just worked very, very hard on his game, and I tried to follow his example.
The next year, Essendon lost Norm MacDonald and Bob Syme, who went off to the country to play, and then in round 8, disaster struck. After kicking 5 goals against North at Windy Hill, Coleman fell to the ground early in the last quarter, dislocating his knee.
And like you did with John, you just kicked it high to the end of the square, and there was a pack went for the ball, and John hit the pack, as he often did, coming from the behind post, and then went down. And I knew something was bad because the doctor was out before he hit the ground.
The stretcher came out. They put him on the stretcher, and so of course his knee's facing into his other leg, and the thigh so completely dislocated. It looked an absolute mess. So they took him off, but never did it cross my mind or anyone else that would be the last we'd see of it. Never from that, because he was bulletproof, indestructible, Coleman.
After 98 games, 537 goals, the career of John Coleman had been tragically cut short at the age of 25. There are those, and Dick Reynolds supports them, who say that Bill Hutchison was the finest ever to represent Essendon. Above Coleman, above the legendary Albert Thurgood or Tom Fitzmaurice, above even King Richard himself.
I love that guy. Like he was one of the driving power, and he had that much energy. He could go and go all day. Like I used to have a run on the ball, but I used to be lucky to get about 4 or 5 minutes every quarter with him on there. But he was unbelievable the way he kept going.
The man was honoured when the Hall of Fame was opened in the AFL centenary year. He was an automatic choice in the inaugural list of 14 inductees. His record is incredible. The Brownlow medals of 1952 and 53, second placing in 1955, third in 48 and 51, 7 Best and Fairest awards, 10 grand finals, 28 finals, 30 state Guernseys, 2 All-Australian Blazers. He would play 290 games between 1942 and 57.
Rippon, oh, terrific. He was unreal. And for the size of him, he had more guts than anyone I know. And a brilliant player. He had speed and everything.
In the early 80s, he appeared on Seven's World of Sport alongside a former mortal enemy.
So long ago, he was one of the greatest rovers of all times, won a Brownlow medal, and a great personality, and doing a great job as a state selector, except when they go to Canberra. Is that right?
That's right, yeah. Well, Billy, on behalf of everyone around here, you've just heard the applause for you, but we'd like you to take a memento away of coming in as our Brownlow medalist. Thanks, a beautiful silver tankard there from Carlton in Ida. And you never had much trouble with him. Did he ever, do that bit of a wipe-up business?
I have the distinction of being the last man that he hit. He hit hundreds, as you know.
Yeah.
And in the last 5 minutes of his last game, he gave me a terrific karate chop in the throat and nearly decapitated.
Did he?
Yes, he was.
But you were
pretty savage that day.
Superbly fit, a non-drinker and non-smoker, Hutchison was an athlete whose durability mixed with his courage and determination marked him as one of the greats. In the mid-50s, after the retirement of Coleman, Hutchison would be the experienced general who would lead a new breed of bombers on the field under the watchful eye of Coach Reynolds. By 1957, Hutchie was nearing the end of his great career. In that year, he watched as a 20-year-old from Ballarat named John Burt made his debut with the club. He would be destined to become a rover in the greatest tradition.
There was a lot of things that Hutchie used to tell me as a rover, Steve, that we should do, and other things just psychologically in your football about never giving up. There was one particular stage where the ball wouldn't bounce your way early in the game, and he'd say things like, if it doesn't bounce your way early in the game, keep on trying the things that you know you've got to do, and it'll come your way.
The undoubted power side of the VFL was Melbourne. Premiers in 1955 and 56, they had come to Windy Hill in round 14 to face the young Bombers. Hutchison was the only man to have played 100 games. In fact, he was in his 286th. The game would end sensationally when Rovers' Stan Booth was penalised for pushing the ball out deliberately. Melbourne's Athol Webb kicked the clincher with seconds to go. Years later, it was described as the worst decision ever against the Bombers.
At that time, that really stood out as a fairly controversial decision. Nowadays, it would be treated with a grain of salt, I think.
The Bombers were a dejected lot as they walked from the field. The loss would ultimately cost them the top spot on the ladder. Among the stars that year, Jeff Leake, a giant who had turned his game around.
I had Gill and Leake. They were 6'5" and they were two big blokes, and they were on the ball all the time and that. And Hutchie and I had a birthday with them and hitting out, and we'd get the ball. The only things that they woke up is when the Rovers the other side used to get alongside you and try to, and you have to go forward and then back around and get the ball.
In the last home and away match of the season, they belted Carlton by 10 goals. John Burt in the thick of things with 4. After huge defeats at the hands of Melbourne in their 3 previous encounters at the MCG, this would be a different Essendon side. As historian Michael Maplestone wrote in Flying Higher, The History of Essendon. This didn't seem to worry the team. They went out and astonished the football world by turning on a great display of class and teamwork to defeat Melbourne by 16 points. In the second quarter, they set up the win with 9 goals. The Demons held to 2 points.
We actually had about 5 of our good players out in that second semi, and those players were brought back for the grand final, and Hutchie was one. And it looked as though with these 5 very good players coming in, including Hutchie, that we were going to run all over Melbourne in the grand final.
There were 100,000 at the MCG for the rematch. This time, the premiership was at stake. Could the Melbourne juggernaut be stopped? Essendon led onto the ground by Bill Hutchison in his 290th and last game. The players stopped, gathered round him and gave him 3 cheers.
He just gave his all, never stopped.
This time there would be no stopping Melbourne. The Demons set for a hat-trick of premierships for the second time in their history. For Bill Hutchison, it was a dismal way to bow out. Bill Hutchison had played in a premiership under Reynolds in his first season with the club in 1942. His last match would be in a grand final 16 years later. Bill Hutchison would die at the age of 59 in 1982.
Today,
7 years after making his senior debut as a 17-year-old in 1951, Jack Clark assumed the captaincy of Essendon. He was only the 3rd man to take the job since Reynolds took charge in 1939.
not scored a goal for Essendon, but he certainly has
The right of succession had been well thought out.
The win makes it only worth
Reynolds,
30
after 12 years, to Hutchison, who held the post for 7 years, then on to the articulate and precise, creative and skillful Clark.
83 points.
Under coach Dick Reynolds, 1958, though, would not be all that memorable. The club would blood 3 recruits. From Western Australia after 2 years' wait, the Kookaburra, Alec Eppes,
Has one bounce. Well shepherded by Eppes. Gets a kick down towards half-forward line. Wimmer.
and from the St John Baptists in the Essendon District League, 2 key forwards and good mates in Ron Evans and Ken Fraser. Evans would twice be the VFL leading goal kicker and eventually rise to become chairman of the AFL Commission. Fraser would lead the side to a premiership and distinguish himself as one of the game's greatest ever centre-half forwards.
Ken was immediately successful. He just had that certain something that we needed, and we needed a centre-half forward at that stage. He really was a brilliant player. And it was, as you say, it was the start of the build-up of us getting somewhere, rebuilding the team. And we needed that because I think we were a little bit lacking in some class players. And I think also we were a bit soft in those days as well. We didn't have enough of the killer instinct, and that probably cost us a couple of flags as well.
While Essendon would miss the finals, Clark would win his 3rd All-Australian blazer at the ANFC Championships in Melbourne. Reg Burgess would be honoured as well, while Jeff Leake had to be content with being part of the victorious Big V lineup. A year later, Essendon would figure in the finals. They had lost to Melbourne in the second semi-final and then on preliminary final day enjoyed a visit from Princess Alexandra prior to the game against Carlton.
She walked out and met us when they rolled the red carpet out, and it was a wet day. And we were all advised before the game not to use any resin on our hands before meeting Her Royal Highness. And Sir Kenneth Luke was the Carlton president at that stage, and he was also president of the VFL. And she met the Carlton players firstly, and then she was introduced to the umpires, and then she was introduced to Jack Clark, who in turn introduced the Essendon boys. And I was the first to be introduced from Essendon, and when she held out her hands just covered in rosin from all the Carlton boys. So, you know, the glove was actually black. It didn't perturb at all, but I just thought it was a little ironic that their president was the one who issued the instruction not to use rosin, and the Carlton boys forgot.
The Bombers would win a thriller by 7 points and moved into their second grand final in 3 years. Clark would lead Essendon onto the MCG for the grand final against Melbourne. The Bombers had recruited well again. Brian Sampson, Barry Capuano, the fiery Ian Bluey Shelton, and a president of the future in David Shaw. They were in contention until three-quarter time, but then watched the Demons overrun them.
I had the role of tagging Brassey, and I thought I'd done a reasonable job till three-quarter time. And then in the last quarter, Brassey absolutely cut loose, and he took 3 spectacular marks, kicked 3 goals, and the game was over.
Injuries to key players in Hugh Mitchell and Brian Sampson took the gloss off the 1960 season. The Bombers winning through to the first semi-final against eventual grand finalists Collingwood.
Very sensibly here in the final term, and once again it's Alec Eppers doing a great job for the Bombers on that half-back flank. He's covering plenty of territory. Socket off the ground by Somerville. Here's a chance down there in the back pocket for Reeves of Collingwood to pick the ball up, and I think he's rushed it through for a point. He has, so that makes the difference now 2 points in the first semi-final. 7-14-56 to Essendon, to Collingwood 7-12-54.
2 points the difference. The Bombers hanging on at the moment, waiting for the ball to come back into play. Going off the ground there was Ron Evans, their full forward.
In a tight, low-scoring game, Essendon had the chance in the dying minutes to hit the front, but it wasn't to be.
Forward line for Essendon, a chance for the Bombers here again to go forward as it's kicked out towards the right half-forward flank, and the mark for Essendon dragged in out there in front of the members stand by Dunlop. Dunlop about 50 yards out. With this ball, though, as Lou said, it must seem like 50 miles. Can he score for Essendon? 57 plays 60. Still only 3 points the difference. A goal would put the Bombers in front by that margin. Into the goal square it comes. A chance for Leake. The umpire doesn't pay the mark, though. It's play on. And driven out of the danger zone by Gabalik, playing a great job for it.
This semi-final would be the final appearance as coach for Dick Reynolds. His record at the time was second only to Collingwood's Jock McHale in longevity and success. He had coached the Bombers for 415 games over 21 years at a winning strike rate of 66%. From 12 grand finals, there'd been 4 premierships.
This is the ball. There's Piker. Picks the ball up for Essendon. Has a snapshot for goal. It's going close off the hands again. And it goes through for one behind as the siren's gone. The siren's gone. It's a win to Collingwood. And the final score here in the first semi-final. Essendon 7-15-57. Defeated by Collingwood 9-12-66.
A gentleman to the very end, Reynolds may not have applied the guts and brimstone approach that was finding favour. He may have been loath to hurt players' feelings. His team had cruelly been dubbed the Gliders in some quarters. There would never be a question about his devotion to the club or his men.
If you're not good enough or something, you get dropped, you just got a couple. Well, fellas that I've talked to over the years, you know, you have to tell them that unfortunately they're not quite good enough, they'd have to go elsewhere. Well, when you do that, well, if you get it thrown at you, well, you've got to just cop it.
His replacement would be the mighty John Coleman, appointed after the committee was split between Reynolds and his most famous player.
I do think that with a better balanced side, our form will improve all over the ground.
Essendon had been known as the Gliders, and probably there was a tendency to avoid the tough issues. I think the one thing that John did do was form a small squad of enforcers, so if one of our small players went down, who are our playmakers, one of theirs went down.
I think around about the time Coleman came in, the game changed a lot. There was more
blackboard talks, more personal contact with players, players playing in various positions. He changed around. They were entirely two different coaches. Dick probably was coaching in the latter part of his career, similar to what he was doing probably 10 years prior to the time that he finished, but still a great coach. But Coleman, in my opinion, I felt was well before his time.
After a mediocre year in 1961, highlighted by the debut of Barry Davis, no one was prepared for the year ahead. 1962 would be one of the greatest in the club's history. It would lose only 2 games against Hawthorn and Footscray, who had played off for the 61 flag. Week after week, the Bombers' momentum picked up. They'd survived a thriller against St Kilda, beating the Saints at the Junction Oval by 4 points. When they met Ted Whitten's Bulldogs at Windy Hill in round 6, they showed that they were capable of big things. The Blues would fall in a tight game in round 16, but Essendon had top spot firmly in its grasp. With 16 wins from 18 games, it had recorded its best year since 1950. They were the hottest team in the competition. Record crowds would see them play, and the battle for tickets was just as fierce, as Lou Richards found.
And what's your name?
Barry Atkinson.
And what side do you follow?
Essendon.
And what time did you get here this morning?
Oh, about 6 o'clock.
6 o'clock?
Yeah.
Did you bring food and everything down here for yourselves?
Yeah, miles of food.
A record second semi-final crowd of 95,000 saw Jack Clark lead his side onto the MCG for the game against Geelong, a match that would be remembered as one of the best finals in years. After a tight first half, Essendon would dominate the second half, kicking 7 goals to the Cats 1.
Already kicked a goal for Essendon. His short pass is going to find a teammate. It has. It's found Hugh Mitchell upfield, and Hugh Mitchell is on an angle of 20 degrees and 35 yards from goal.
Usually a reliable kick, Hughie Mitchell. Will probably kick a drop kick. He likes these kicks. Here he is coming into habit. It is a drop kick, and it's going straight towards the centre of the goals. And it's a goal to Essendon, kicked by the reliable Hughie Mitchell.
In front they battle for it hard. 2 kicking it off the ground, Rogers. Rice is in there for Geelong. Rogers comes through on the inside. Capuano picks it up instead. Capuano kicks the ball in towards the goal square again, and Payne marks this one. He didn't expect another opportunity such as he had before in such quick succession, but he gets it. And another sharply angled chance. 4.5 minutes of time on gone in this third quarter. A chance for Payne to put Essendon 15 points in front again in this quarter. A good kick, and he's done that. Essendon 15 points up, right on the siren for three-quarter time. The game held their interest to half-time when there was only 1 point the difference, and Geelong were in front then. But since then, Essendon have taken it right away from them. Here's Bird having another shot at the sticks, and he's done it again to become the second chief goal scorer in the match.
And there's Essendon again, but this time Paul Viner gets the ball, doesn't know what to do with it, handballs it across to Callan. Callan goes to handball it, puts it over it, and there's the end of the game. Well umpired by Bob Nunn, whose first semi-final was excellent. And we see Johnny Coleman being congratulated by Harry Hunter and also by the Russell Blue, who just came off a while ago to give somebody else a run. Coleman is jubilant, as all the Essendon fans are. They go into the grand final. They must be happy. 14-21 to 7-17.
One of the greatest sights in the sporting world, the MCG on Grand Final day. When Clark led his men onto the field for the 62 Grand Final, there were serious doubts. Half-forward Terry Rogers had been ruled out after injuring his leg, and ruckman Jeff Leake had been in doubt up to the morning of the game.
On the Thursday night, prior to the Grand Final, we had a fairly intense practice run out. We're all keen to get the ball, and I stood on Bluey Shelton's great big boot and twisted my ankle. I got to the ground and I had to have a fitness test, as we've all done that. So the chairman and selectors was standing by, and he said, "You've got to kick this medicine ball to prove your ankle's okay." So
you had to kick it.
Had to kick the medicine ball. It was on the ground. It was.
They were men in those days, Jim.
Everything was big in those days. So I gave this medicine ball a bit of a ginger kick, and they said, "You have to kick it harder than that." So I stood off and gave it a bit of a heavier kick, and a few more kicks, and they said, "Harder, harder." So in the last instance, I stood off and gave this mighty kick and moved the thing about 6 feet across the floor. So he said, "Please." I was wrapped, and Coleman said, "He's all right for me," but they didn't know even to this day that I was kicking it with my good foot.
He marks the ball right on the line.
The Bombers had started overwhelming favourites. Nothing, it seemed, would stop them. Into the last quarter, and the Bombers had the game sealed. Carlton showing the signs of a finals campaign that had seen them figure in a draw and 2 thrillers.
The kick comes along the flank position. Capuano goes under the ball, picked up by Nichols. He handballs to Kick. Kick gets flattened by Shelton. James takes the ball. Nichols not very happy with Shelton, and Kick is in trouble. He's really hurt.
John, I'm quite certain that any of us up here were thankful that we didn't cop that. It was a forearm, a beauty, and up the field, Nichols and Shelton are doing a little bit of niggling with each other. Just the free kick has been taken by James.
And there's a mark to Essendon in the last line of defence by Paul Doran.
Behind Mitchell. Mitchell kicks the ball back to the half-back line for his side. Cox came in but missed the ball. Capuano drops it. Now Clark gets it and punches it to Beisel, and Essendon come forward. They're into attack. The ball on the half-forward line. It's over the half-forward line. Payne getting set for a mark. Payne takes it. 8 minutes gone in the last quarter of the 1962 Grand Final. Essendon comfortably in front by 21 points, but not that comfortably. Here's Leake going for the knockaway. It's out there towards Davis. Davis is tackled by Greenwood, but gets his kick in first. His kick is to the centre wing on the outer side. They chase it here. Into the players, Varlamov, 32. 19 is Somerville doing the kicking. Somerville kicks the ball under the half-forward line, taken by Fraser. Handballs across to Blue. Blue blind turns and runs into Varlamov. Gets his kick in first towards Burt. Burt at centre half-forward has his head pulled off. Free kick. Against Barclay Cox it was, and it's Burt's free kick. Burt already has kicked 3 goals for the Dons, but it'd be a terrific effort to get one from here. He's 65 yards from goal. His kick is doing very well. It's going to within 15 yards of goal, and there is a beautiful mark taken by number 14 for the Blues, Bob Crow. A kick here will put it through. This is Peter Barry, determined that that kick from Essendon will not come. He kicks it onto the half-back line. This is Blue coming upfield. Blue kicks the ball right back into the goal square. Johnson up from behind, takes a glorious mark. Graham Johnson. How he got over the top of Silvani and Anderson to take that mark, I'll never know. Probably he won't either. But he went three ways all at once. Here he is, right in front. And that wraps it up. Essendon must be the premiers.
Leake had played superbly, and when he walked from the ground, it would be for the last time.
Bouncing in the centre of the ground. Oh, Mackenzie flew. There is Jeff Leake, the Essendon vice-captain. He was suspect before the game with an injured ankle. He has played till Essendon in a commanding enough position to come off. The gentle giant, as he's known here, a tremendous footballer.
Didn't come easy for me. I was more on the awkward style, and if you're awkward you really have to push yourself and you have to train harder, and it's that much harder to make it. I'd rather go out on I thought about it of course, but I'd rather go out on a high note and say okay, last game, win a premiership, and go out with those memories, and that's what I did.
Along the wing it goes. It's onto the half-back line for his side, but no rest for the Carlton defence. Blue keeps up the pressure. Here's his kick into the full-forward zone, and Charlie Payne spins across the top of the pack and picks it out of the air. Payne is straight in front. Couldn't be straighter. He has kicked 1 goal and a couple of behinds. The second one should be coming up. Yes, sir. Charlie Payne's second goal. The Bombers 13.
Hill gets the ball, knocks it ahead of him, runs into his own teammate, handballs it across, and there's the siren, and here's the little premiers. For 1962, Essendon, 13 goals, 12, 90, have defeated Carlton, 8 goals, 10, 58.
Coleman had turned the side around.
Now we're just going across to John Coleman, one of the happiest men in Melbourne, undoubtedly, John. One of the happiest men in Melbourne at this stage.
Well, very happy to have won, Bill, yes. It just finishes off the season as far as we're concerned.
Yes, John, did you have any worries through the big game at all?
Yes, just before half-time when they got a couple of quick goals, I thought we shouldn't have let them get them. That was my opinion. Then I thought in the third quarter, well, I didn't think 3 goals was enough. Yeah. But my original opinion has borne me out, and that was that Carlton weren't fit.
Well, John, this is direct on the air, and there'll be many, many Essendon supporters listening to you at this time. What would you like to say to them?
Well, we did our best, and thank heavens it was good enough to win it.
When the premiership flag was unfurled at Windy Hill prior to the game against Geelong in 1963, Leake and teammate Graham Beisel looked on. Essendon would win 7 of its first 8 games in 1963.
Essendon, in the meantime, have added 26 points. That is the margin between the sides. Phil Hay kicks off into the wind. It's a good punt kick, holding up nicely into the strong wind coming down the field. A mark is appealed for by Fraser, and he certainly gets it. Fraser has been a dominating factor in Essendon's terrific success in the last 30 minutes of this match, which takes in the last 10 minutes of the third quarter. Fraser's kick is centred for Payne and a big pack of players. Snapping it up, there's an Essendon player. Couldn't see who it was in front of the pack. John Burt, it's a goal. He's on the scoreboard wing as he kicks for Essendon right into attack. Centres it out there towards Fraser. They're playing through him. Fraser won't let him down. Beautiful mark. Fraser proving too good for John MacArthur now. But full credit to MacArthur for an excellent first half in which the going with Fraser, I'd say, was even. If not MacArthur, just a shade in front. 10 minutes of play gone in the final quarter, with Ken Fraser a mark 45 yards from goal. He'll get the distance easily with this wing, and he knocks it right down the chute. And now Essendon are 19 points in front and going like the team that's on top of the VFL list.
A trio of losses, then a huge win against Fitzroy, saw the Bombers on the verge of the Final Four. But a massive St Kilda win over North 2 weeks later would force them out on percentage. 1964. The Bombers would again win 13 games and this time move into the finals. Along the way, they would convincingly beat Footscray at Windy Hill.
Davis, well, I suppose he could have marked it. In the centre, it's Essendon getting the ball away now. And it's Charlie Payne who's come on to take Fraser's place, kicking the ball forward. Here's a chance for Rogers. He has a hook shot in towards goal. And there's his 5th goal. Essendon may have found a full forward.
While Coleman was a disciplinarian, he found one man willing to take him on in Alec Eppes.
It happened, we went to Perth in 64 to play a game, and we called in the Kalgoorlie airport, or Boulders, where I come from, and naturally the people in the town spoke to Coley and said, you know, how's Alec going? Because I come from there, you know. How good is he? You know, he said, well, he's not as good as he thinks he is. Well, you can imagine how many locals have told me. So I thought, right, that's all right, I'll get him when I get back to Melbourne. So we got back to Melbourne, and I just hadn't got around to challenging him, but out in training one night, I said to him, you know, you've got a bloody big mouth. I said, if you want to say anything, come and tell me. I said, you said this about me in Calgary. I said, I want to smack you right in the gob for that. He goes, well, you want to have a go, do you? I goes, yeah. He goes, well, where do you want to do it? I said, anywhere you like. He goes, well, I'll be inside in 10 minutes. I'll see you. I said, not a worry. So after training, we went inside, and of course, Coley had pubs all his life, and he'd been used to dodging mugs, throwing punches, hadn't he? I mean, that was his go. So we got inside and we had this go again, and I said, well, he said, you want to biff me? I said, yeah. And he said, well, have a go. And I went whack, and I threw one, and he just jumped to one side, and because we'd been arguing for a few minutes before this happened, and the club doctor jumped in to break us up, and I hit him right in the snout and broke his glasses and nearly knocked him out. And Simby was a great friend of all of ours. Colin's going, you bloody idiot, what have you done? I go, well, I don't know, you shouldn't have moved your head, you know.
Clark finds himself faced.
In the first semi-final, a rough house affair, they would be knocked from pillar to post by Geelong. It would be Jack Clark's 222nd game, but last as captain. The highlight, perhaps, John Coleman's outburst at field umpire Ron Brophy. Coleman had to be physically restrained.
It was quite humorous, and Ron apparently given a free kick that shouldn't have occurred right in front of John, and at times John did get a little bit hot-headed, and I think you understand that coaches get that way even today. He came over the boundary and said to Brof what he thought of him, and I think that was at the stage where umpires weren't very popular with John, because as time went on, even when he was a player, I don't think he had the protection he should have got, all the attention he had, and I think that sort of brushed off into his coaching career. At that particular game, it was a decision that was given at the crucial stage of the game, which he disagreed with, and then he decided to go out on the ground and tell Brof what he thought of him.
In July 1998, some of Essendon's most famous sons gathered at a luncheon at the Hyatt Hotel in Melbourne to celebrate the discovery of a lost football gem, the video of the 1965 Essendon Grand Final victory over St Kilda. Snippets of the game had been seen over the decades, but not until the whole match was discovered in the film archives of the ABC had anyone seen the game in its entirety. The launch of the Lost Grand Final by Australian Football Video at the Dick Reynolds Club luncheon in front of nearly 500 guests was the chance to look back on that fabulous season.
It's a drop kick, it's not a good one. Falls in short, Fraser is there and marks on his chest despite opposition from Sinman. One kick is right through the middle.
Ruck's come down. Here's Sampson getting in front of Dietrich, knocking the ball clear. It's picked up here by Essendon, looking in towards the goal. Chance for Fordham. He picks up, shoots the goal. Or was it Gosper? No, it was Gosper dropping down from the half-forward flank.
Onto the stage came the heroes, men who had played with distinction in the great sides of 62 and 65.
Ben was an inspiration to everyone, really, because he was so well liked and respected by everybody. He was a player who did not swear and did not have a drink around the club at all. And in his early years, he was not ridiculed for it, but he was. People used to have a bit of a go at him. But because, one, he was such a great player, and two, because he was such a great person and a great character around the club, that he had the utmost respect of everybody. And as soon as he became captain, the players just responded to him.
Fraser had been the logical choice as skipper. His form at centre-half forward in the 60s to date had been outstanding. He had finished runner-up to Alistair Lloyd in the 62 Brownlow, was 7th in 63, tied for second behind Gordon Collis in 64, and would put on another strong showing in 65.
Somerville comes down to meet it, gets hold of it too, gets rid of it towards Capuano, who misses it. Tim's coming through to help out. Essendon not saying die, you can bet on that. The ball shot pass by Timms to Fordham, who takes the mark. Fordham has had many kicks in the forward line in this quarter, but Essendon can't convert well-won opportunities. Melbourne's last line of defence playing superbly. The ball comes into the goal square. Look at that mark taken by Fraser, and he must score a goal from there. Time is running out for the Dons. 18 minutes of play gone in the final quarter. They are 5 goals, 2 behind. Fraser kicks a goal. Maybe that can revive Essendon to better things. In the
his veterans, Jack Clark, Huey Mitchell, Ian Shelton and David Shaw were in top form.
Shelton, a lovely mark too by Shelton, who's played well all day. He and Gill have had some wonderful duels. Fraser, at least Shelton, runs around Gill, bounces it and then kicks it down towards the half-forward line.
The Dons haven't scored in this quarter. It's the final quarter underway, and Carlton a couple of goals up, 15 points up. The ball to Jack Clark. Jack Clark must score a goal with this kick. It's well on its way to doing this. It's swinging away and it hits the post.
At the Western Oval, they had humiliated Footscray. Ted Fordham on target with 6 in a year that would net him 54 goals.
Well, I remember that Footscray game very well because Ron Brophy was the umpire, and I think I kicked about 6-8 or something for the day. But I think that was sort of the build-up to the finals, and as the finals went on, I think we just played better and better.
At the Lakeside Oval, South Melbourne under captain coach Bobby Skilton won by 8 points. The Bombers hard hit by the loss of backman Barry Davis, who had surgery after a head clash against St Kilda the previous week, and Sheldon out with a broken hand. The next week, the Ron Barassi-inspired Blues made its successive losses. Carlton could thank the Bombers' atrocious kicking. 5-23 from 28 shots in a 16-point loss. It's hard to imagine what Coach Coleman made of that one. A string of 5 wins, culminating in a fine showing against Footscray, had the Bombers back into finals contention. Coleman looked well satisfied as he left the arena. The Carlton match at Princes Park in round 18 was the game of the round. The TV crews were there in full force. With Fraser injured, Louis Shelton stood in as skipper. Essendon could not be forced out of the top 4, but a win could push it into second place and a final berth in the second semi-final against St Kilda. Carlton could not make the finals and played superb football. They led all day. At half-time, it was 29 points. By three-quarter time, the Blues had a 40-point break, and despite a last quarter surge of 6 goals to 1 by Essendon, the final margin would be 9 points in Carlton's favour. On first semi-final day, Ian Stewart was honoured for his Brownlow win. He was flanked by rival skippers Polly Farmer and Ken Fraser on the lap of honour. Fraser again polling well to finish 4th.
It was one of those years where we just seemed to peak at the right time. We played quite well through the year, and we played some very good games, but we weren't the outstanding team through the year, and then we seemed to peak at the right time and had a magnificent run in the finals. And really the teams that we played, we were able to account for them pretty well.
10 minutes into the preliminary final, Essendon half-forward John Somerville was knocked unconscious.
Hello, there's a player out on the ground. Somerville has just collapsed.
I don't think he collapsed. Noel Teasdale, what happened? Did you see it?
No, Mike, I didn't see it. The only thing I saw was Somerville falling to the ground and Wright just walking away. It doesn't look very good, though. I don't think that he's collapsed from his own sources.
Hello, there's a bit of jostling going on down there.
Wait a minute, this fella's had a lot of illnesses, Mike. Now, let's be quite honest about this. It looks pretty serious. He's just collapsed.
Well, I was the first to go across to John. I sort of saw out of the corner of my eye, looking up the ground. The ball had sort of gone up the other end, and I looked out the corner of my eye and I saw John down, and I sort of rushed over and sort of began to say to him, well, come on, John, get up, the ball's going to come back quickly. And then John didn't move, so I sort of turned him a little bit and saw blood trickling out of his mouth, and the eyes were just out, so I waved with the trainers, and then they rushed in.
Yeah, well, I played on a young fella called Peter McKenna playing one of his first games, and he said to me, what's happened? What's happening? What's happening? And I said, look, one of our blokes has just been knocked out, and I said, if you get anywhere near the ball today, I'm going to knock your head and you'll wake up bloody 3 weeks later. Anyhow, poor bugger, he never spoke to me for the rest of the day, and when Kenny Fraser came round telling everyone to calm down and be careful and whatnot and play the ball and everything, Peter McKenna said to him, come and tell this bloke.
The incident wasn't caught on film, but it spurred the Bombers on. Essendon, with Fordham kicking 6, would move into the grand final. Just as they had done in 1949, with Coleman on the verge of his 100 goals in that amazing debut season, the Bombers were hoping to win the flag from 4th spot. Hugh Mitchell was one of 14 players who was aiming at the 62-65 premiership double.
We had a dream run in 62. 65 we did it the hard way, and it wasn't up until the second last or even the last home and home game that we fell into 4th place. And we won every finals by, I think it was 6 goals plus.
Calling the 1965 grand final for the ABC were Ken Dakin, Dick Mason and Richmond's dual Brownlow medalist Roy Wright. They joined 104,000 others as St Kilda, who had finished top of the ladder and was studded with stars like Baldock, Stewart, Ditteridge and Cooper, attempted to win its first league premiership.
Essendon, almost the same position that he kicked his previous goal from, favours the drop kick. It's not a good one. Falls in short. Fraser is there and marks on his chest despite opposition from Sinman. Punt kick is right through the middle.
Ruck's come down. Here's Sampson getting in front of Dittrick, knocking the ball clear. It's picked up here by Essendon, driven in towards the goal. Chance for Fordham. He picks up, shoots the goal. Or was it Gosper? No, it was Gosper dropping down from the half-forward flank, and he slaps it through for the Dons' 3rd goal. Ruck's come in again. Dittrick goes high from behind, gets the tap. It's picked up, though, by Jack Clark. He sends it up towards Fordham. Fordham take the mark. A beauty. Almost on their centre half-forward position. He's looking for a lead further afield. There it comes from Fordham, and again he's brought down very heavily by Ditteridge.
Fordham would equal the grand final record with 7 goals, as Essendon moved away to a 35-point win.
There's the shot at goal. It's all right, it's through, it's a goal.
I didn't know it equalled the grand final record. In those days, not many players worried about records. We played for our club. We were loyal to our club. It's a little bit different to what it is today, as you well realise. I wasn't aware until after the game that I had equalled the record, and I was a proud guy that when I did find out after the game that I had kicked a 7, and that did equal the record that was in being at the time.
45 yards out from goal, on the angle, favours the drop kick. Up high, an Essendon mark. It's Sampson, and Sampson has marked in the goal square. Sampson kicks it through the middle. There's another goal to Essendon.
Sampson knocks it cleverly to Burt. Burt's going to line it up, shoot for goal, and it looks all right to me. It's straight through.
Spiral punt kick right up to the 10-yard square. Players set themselves to punch the ball away. Here's Mitchell running into an open goal and pops it through.
Sampson comes to the ball here, hand passes across. It's come out here where it's picked up nicely by Gosper. Gosper shoots for goal and it goes through. A goal to Essendon. Cooper flies for it, couldn't hold it, picked up there by Mackenzie. Mackenzie towards Fordham, and Fordham takes out another mark. What a magnificent player this chap has been.
Baldock is brushed away from the ball, taken by Pryor of Essendon and driven out to the flank where the mark is taken by Blue. Blue drives Essendon further forward once more, looking for Gosper. The ball is punched away from that player, comes back into play to Mitchell. Good football by Essendon. The Dons going forward again, looking for Fordham in the pocket. Fordham is up high, it comes to Sampson. Sampson in trouble, Borks whips the hand pass to Fordham. Fordham runs in, slams away at goal and puts another one on the board. That's his 7th goal. He's a lead further afield given by Smith, but here's Davis chipping in from the half-back flank for Essendon to cut off yet another St Kilda drive forward.
Chance now for St Kilda to go forward, getting the ball up towards Cooper. There goes the siren, and it's all over. And there's a very happy-looking John Coleman with his back to us in the light coat, the coach of Essendon and one of the greatest full forwards the game has seen in Victoria. And don't they look a happy bunch, the Essendon bench, with John Coleman being congratulated all round. Alan Jeans, there he is, the St Kilda coach, moving along to congratulate John Coleman. Well, let's have a look at the final scoreboard. Essendon 14-21, 105 points. St Kilda 9-16-70.
Ken Fraser would be given the honour of receiving Essendon's 12th Premiership Cup.
Just to hold the cup and to say we're there, we've got it, was just extreme relief, and then, you know, real exhilaration. But relief was that we'd done it, you know, against a good opposition in St Kilda, and the crowd, because they were the underdogs, were a bit their way, and it was just sheer relief.
Later, the feelings were obvious.
To all you boys, I don't know whether you can hear me or not, but how would you live against these boys playing today? Firstly, you, John Coleman. How would I what, Lou? How would you go against these fellas playing today? Wouldn't get a kick.
In 1966, Essendon again won 15 matches. Among the recruits this day against Footscray, Alan Noonan.
Look at him using his strength there, couldn't get away with the ball. Noonan's got it now, snapped it in towards goal. And that's good. This bloke, the ball seems to follow him, and he seems to love it. He gets plenty of kicks. There's his kick. Up goes Mackenzie. He's under the ball a bit. He can't mark it. Mackenzie comes in, acting captain for the Dons today. There's a shot in towards goal. It's going to hook in. It is 9-16. A good goal to Don Mackenzie.
They again finished 4th and won the first semi-final against Geelong. This time St Kilda would stop them in the preliminary final. After 2 rounds of the 1967 season, Coleman reacted sensationally to the club's poor form. He dropped the veterans Jack Clark and Hugh Mitchell. It was an unceremonious end to the distinguished career of Clark after 263 games and Mitchell after 224.
Harry Hunter just rang up one night and said, well, you know, you're out of the side, and he was the only one that spoke to me, and that really stuck in my craw a bit.
I was a little upset and disappointed, and when you get that stage, you feel that way. Then I resigned. Jack, we were both dropped, of course, into the reserves. I resigned because I thought, OK, well, that's it, end of my career.
The club missed the finals. For Coleman, the end was nigh. He had struggled with pain in that most famous of footy knees.
John, can I ask you this question? Your coaching plans for the future, not just next week, but next season, etc.
Oh, I don't think that far ahead, Jeff. At the moment, I'm coaching Essendon, and my big job now is to get them back into form and back into the fore.
Well, you're saying you're a year-to-year prospect, eh, as far as a coach is concerned?
I'm a week-to-week at the moment.
At 39, Coleman retired. Back to the club came Jack Clark. He vowed to put the fun back into footy.
Essendon had reached a stage where players were frightened to do anything in case they made a mistake. John we had a bad year the year before, and John's attitude was, well, you know, why did you do that? You know, I told you to do this, do that, and I really wanted to free the players up so that, and become more attacking and aggressive and fitter.
It was a season of change at Windy Hill. From 6th in 1967 under Coleman, the Bombers became the most feared team in the VFL, surging to top spot. After beating Carlton twice during the season, Clark's men faced Barassi's Blues in the second semi-final in front of a record crowd of 106,000. Apart from a strong 5-goal second quarter, the Bombers were outgunned. A disappointing result, but the skipper was still confident.
After last Saturday's second semi-final, a lot of talk that Essendon are not the team that they're knocked up to be.
Oh, well, of course, you always get this, Bob, after a team does poorly in a match, the critics get on the bandwagon and dig the boots in, but we'll just sort of spurs you on to prove them wrong, and this has been a tremendous spur to us.
What's the atmosphere like in the camp at the moment? Is it one of determination?
I'll say I've never seen the team more determined, and it's far better, I think, than last week. We tended to think it probably was ours when we didn't really have that attitude of earning it.
Essendon met Geelong in the preliminary final. Earlier in the season, the Bombers had won by 23 points.
Ellis has gone for the pass here to Noonan. Noonan marks in front of Walker.
Great mark. That was a strong mark, Butch. Very strong. The Dons playing really well. There's the kick now.
This would be a costly victory as the club moved into the grand final. Ken Fraser was an early casualty, injuring his leg.
I agree with you, Mike. I would have held on to Brown for a while, the way Fraser is. And I may not have noticed this, Teddy, that he was limping. There they go. Oh, look at Fraser. Goodness gracious me. Walker across to Goggin now. Goggin tries a short.
He would miss the grand final and sadly never play for the club again.
Yes, Fraser's coming off, and Bruce Lake is coming on. Bruce Lake, his first year with the Dons.
In 68, I'd sort of felt that was my last AFL or VFL season, and it would have been lovely to finish off with a grand final and with a win, but just one of those freak accidents, and a player fell across my knee and did the ligaments, and so it was very disappointing.
It's on Essendon's half-forward flank on the member stand side. There's the bounce of the ball. The Dons are kicking up to the new stand end. A beautiful tap down goes to Fordham. Fordham swings it around. The players come out to meet it. There's Lake in there. Couldn't quite pull it in. Taken by Rosenau. Rosenau puts his boot into it. Costa has the chance there, but lets it go for Ellis. Ellis over to Fordham. Here's a go. Fordham!
A 4-goal win despite some atrocious kicking in the final term, and Clark had lifted his side into the grand final in his first year as coach.
It's all over. Essendon into the grand final next week against Carlton. The final scoreboard at the MCG reading after the preliminary final. Geelong 9-13-67 going down to Essendon 11-25. Is that right? 11-25. 91.
There's a bit of a doubt about Fraser, you know. I got told that he's got an injured knee. It might be the end of it.
Yes, he was a good player too.
That's right, and
Sproul.
There's a fella stood there in amongst the seven, that Blethen, Jack.
Yeah.
He wears glasses like Louis.
They played him in the wrong place, Sproul.
He's a prefect.
Centre player.
He's a prefect at school.
Who?
Blethen.
Is he?
Might be
he had
in.
to wear glasses. He was the first one to introduce the ones, what do you call those? The other ones were...
Contact lenses. Contact lenses.
Yeah, contact lenses, yes. He looked like he was going to give up football there for a while.
Through they come there. Plenty of Carlton defenders. Jones picks it up, but it's intercepted here by Gosper. Gosper drives it wide across and Fordham. Nice mark. Lake. It's Lake. Lake has marked.
They sneaked him on very quickly.
50 yards out, directly in front. Bruce Lake. He kicks. He's put it through. Chance for Crane. He goes over. He scrambles the ball out to Silvani. Silvani and everything in the last half. Kicks it forward. Shark by Eppes once again. Eppes going for a bit of a run. He steadies. It's a long kick up towards centre half forward. They fly high. No mark. Taken here by Gosper. He runs into trouble. Gill tries to get out. Taken by Peter McLean. A hand pass back here to Noonan.
Noonan to get the free.
He wasn't waiting either. Noonan plays on straight away. Kicks down forward.
Oh no, a horrible thought just entered my mind. Could it be a draw?
Brethen has kicked 3.
He's kicked 3 goals. Wesley Loft's claimed he touched that ball, but the umpire says, I'm paying the mark. Up comes Bethan now. He's only 20 yards out on a slight angle. He's put it through. 1 point the difference.
You know, if it had been a 2-umpire system or a 3-umpire system, we'd have won it again, because there was certainly a free kick given to Noonan in the dying minutes of the game when Loftsy hit him fair in the middle of the back in the goal square, which was Crouchy put the whistle up and pulled it down again. And he said to me later, oh gee, you know, I should have blown that, but you know, that's the way it goes.
He's playing it close. Close on the wing position on the outer side. Up he comes to take his kick towards centre half forward. All pressure here, Lofts.
Wonderful mark, a wonderful mark.
In a thrilling final quarter, the Bombers would be deprived by a kick, just as they had done when they played Carlton for the 47 flag. (1970) and the VFL unveiled its new showpiece at Waverley. Ted Whitten retired after breaking Reynolds' games record, and Peter McKenna was kicking goals by the hundreds for Collingwood. Money, it seemed, was no object. Some players thought otherwise, and in one of the biggest stories of the 70s, 5 champion Essendon players went on strike.
It wasn't a strike. We all retired.
We had a slush fund at Essendon. I didn't know about it, and most of the players didn't know about it. But if you went to the then treasurer and said, you know, you're having a difficult time, and you thought you deserved a few more dollars this week, he may or may not give it to you. And then there were players that would come from outside of our zone that would arrive at training. I was riding a bike, and some of the other players would be walking to training, catching public transport, and these guys would come in a brand new car.
So we asked the club for a fair slice of the cake, and at that stage the situation got a little out of hand, perhaps. But then we heard that if we didn't toe the line, that we stood to lose our Provident Fund money, whereby the club would suspend us. So we retired, and we actually handed in our letters of retirement.
Jeff Gosper, Darryl Gerlach, Don McKenzie, Jeff Pryor and Barry Davis wanted $3 for each training session instead of the current $1. They wanted an increase on the $35 basic match payment, and while Essendon agreed in principle, the VFL did not. All 5 retired on the eve of the first game against Carlton.
The following week we came out of retirement, so it wasn't a strike.
The dispute would be settled. Davis would lead the side with McKenzie his deputy. The controversy didn't end there. At the end of the season, in which the club won 6 games, Clark was sacked. He did say publicly beforehand that he lacked support from the committee and in selection. Back came John Burt for 1 season, and 1971 was the Bombers' worst since 1933.
We only had Johnny for 1 year, but I learned a lot from John, and he was an excellent coach. He just didn't get the opportunity to go on for more time because the Essendon committee at the time decided that they need more players, and that's where Tuddy came in as a playing coach.
It would be the beginning of a turbulent period for the club. While many argued that the days of playing coaches were over, Tuddy proved otherwise with his spirited leadership.
Good play, and they swing into attack now. Essendon as the ball goes across the centre half forward, and a good mark taken by Closer. Hand pass to Tudden, a long shot. There's a chance for a goal.
Tuddy didn't notice any players in his path. If the ball was there, he just went and got it. And actually some of my most vivid memories of him was barging through a pack and taking the ball with him and kicking a goal.
When David Shaw and Jim Matthews recruited me, they probably needed a leader on the ground, and to get a little more, I suppose, team discipline, a bit more body contact in their game, and I think it was necessary for a playing coach at that time.
The Bombers were transformed. John Casson reacted to the Tuddy style. He found himself one of the most vigorous players in the game.
Short one. Fields was there, no free kick play on us at all. Oh, Delahunty went through and so did Putnam. It's down to the ground, Hawthorne. Oh! Boy, oh boy!
Jeff Blethyn became the most potent full forward in the VFL.
He sends a long kick up towards centre half forward. Case, Jeff Blethyn.
Looking to brighten Essendon up, gives it to Williams, a nice hit out too. Kicked high up here. Whoa!
Oh, what a mark! himself, wasn't it? Blethyn.
In 1972, he would kick 100 goals, the only player at Essendon apart from Coleman to reach the magical figure.
And Essendon go into attack. A handball to Delahunty. Delahunty to Blethyn. And Blethyn puts it through. Another goal to Essendon.
I always recall the first night we went to training at the showgrounds. We trained there, and Jeff said, look, I'm going down to have a few shots for goals. You know, I said, well, you'll have to be a good player here because I might play you full back. But he just turned around and, you know, proved what a great player he was in kicking 100 goals. And unfortunately, we lost him the year after he went to Western Australia, but he was a great player.
The bespectacled forward was well supported from the centre by Neville Fields, who emerged as a player of great class and skill.
Plenty of time to put him short, and Maloney takes the mark.
They won 5 of their last 7 to play in the first ever elimination final against St Kilda at Waverley.
He got around Howdy on that occasion but lost possession of the ball. It's in there, we see the punched out to Davis. Davis picks up for Essendon. A kick going in towards centre half forward. No mark, it's called play on. Noonan got a hand pass to Casson, he's caught and had caught again, but he wasn't retarded. Elliott with the ball now, docking it on in front of him. Hit a chance for Blethyn. Blethyn swinging back, straightens up, shoots at goal, and Essendon may have answered here. Essendon have goal through Blethyn.
Parks with an opportunity to play on, which he accepts, puts a high kick back towards the forward pocket area. Dittrich is in there, Gritter appealing for the mark. Murray bursts out of the pack with the ball, puts the ball out towards the half-back flank. Fletcher gives chase, the ball close to the line. Fletcher traps it, gets onto the left foot, back towards the right, doesn't fool Trott, and that's it. That's the end of the game.
The first finals game at the league showpiece was not memorable for Tuddy and his men. They went down by 53 points. The 10-year rule came into force in 1973. Essendon would lose the brilliant and long-serving Barry Davis to North Melbourne after 218 games.
It's Lake, I'm sorry, picking the ball up now. We see Davis. Davis swinging back toward the goals. He turns and shoots. It's there!
I'd reached the stage where I was 29 and I'd worked my way up through the club where I was involved in lots of things, felt really a part of the whole show, wanted to be a part of the whole show, and be it as it was that Tuddy came in and he couldn't afford to have someone telling him what to do.
The football world would mourn the shock death of John Coleman on the eve of the season. He was 44.
Parks picks up, and Essendon doing well from the packs. Neville Fields back to Parks. Parks kicking towards centre half full. Big Moss.
The biggest signing at the club in years was West Australian ruckman Graham Moss. Few players had lived up to their lofty reputations quite like Moss, and in 1973 he was superb, finishing runner-up to Keith Gregg in the Brownlow.
16-6 to 14-8, and that's a 2-goal, 2 lead at the moment. Moss now having a deliberate shot at goal.
Which I cry when I don't see any rovers around the point post here.
Yes, cruel.
It looks pretty good, the kick by Moss, it's a goal.
Well, to be quite honest, before my first game, I was a little bit disappointed, in fact. The training seemed to be the same, the club atmosphere seemed to be the same, and I thought, well, what was this big deal about VFL football? But the first game that I played with Essendon was at Windy Hill in the opening game of the 73 season. It was against Richmond, and it was a fantastic game of football. I knew as soon as I ran out in the ground what the difference was. The atmosphere, there was something like 35 to 40,000 people there, and it was just fantastic.
Tuddy didn't care whose feathers he ruffled.
There's Ron Barassi, Brez. A big altercation there before the ball was bounced to the coach Ron Barassi, umpire Bill Della in there, Peter Smith. An ugly incident on the half-forward flank before play even got underway.
After our dress, we were walking back and Barassi tried to float it back with Burns, and he yelled out, give Tuddenham one, So when he said that, of course, I ran after Brass and grabbed him by the shirt and pulled him to the ground, and there was a bit of a melee for a moment.
1974 was highly forgettable, but for the round 7 clash with Richmond. Not so much the game, but the brawl that erupted at half-time. Police intervened as players and officials from both sides slugged it out. After a tribunal lasting more than 4.5 hours, Ron Andrews was suspended for 6 matches, as was Essendon runner Laurie Ashley and fitness advisor Jim Bradley.
I don't know how that started. I was just giving you the half-time score. We're just about to close down. And now all the police on the scene, spectators, officials and players. I can see Graham Richmond, I'd say president, but one of the Richmond top officials in there. being pushed out of the pack now. Police trying to break up this very sordid incident at Wendy Hill. Mel Brown holding his hands up to the crowd. If that's a gesture of victory, I don't know.
Late in the season, Tudman blooded two youngsters, 16-year-old Simon Madden and 18-year-old Gary Folds. Both would play more than 300 games in the years ahead.
He used to coach like this, you know, one of those ones, and the eyes would bulge and the vein in the neck would bulge, and the biceps, because he's really fit, biceps would bulge. And I just, you know, no worries, Tuddy like this. He was just, you know, for a 16, 17-year-old, he was just awesome.
Tuddy could be inflexible, but he never shirked an issue himself.
We'd played Footscray and I didn't sleep that night. I felt that we'd played so bad and I said, well, you guys were on your hands and knees yesterday, be on your hands and knees this morning. It was a spontaneous decision. I had no idea going to the ground that Sunday morning.
Yesterday we had a bad loss. We didn't get down on our hands and knees enough to get the ball. We weren't in on the packs enough to get the ball. And so he said, we're going to practice. So we all thought match practice. And he said, we're doing a lap on our hands and knees. I'm a youngster, I'm sort of looking around for a lead from the older players, and all the older players are sort of... But nobody was going to say no, and Tuddy did it too.
In September, he was sacked. Tudman would return to Collingwood and play on. Finally, he called it quits after breaking his arm in a sickening clash with Carlton's Mark McClure in 1977.
Pick himself up, it's been hooked out to Burn. Going downfield, instead Tudman prepares to leave the field.
The club had tried to lure Kevin Sheedy from Richmond as a playing coach. He declined. Instead, they signed former Fitzroy coach Bill Stephen, who had been assistant to Barassi at North. The star of the 1976 season was Graham Moss. For the third year in a row, he won the club best and fairest, and after finishing second and third, finally won the Brownlow medal from Peter Knights of Hawthorn.
In presenting to Graham Moss its proudest individual trophy for 1976. The fairest and best player in the Victoria Football League of the Essendon Club, Mr. Graham Moss.
Moss stunned the club when he announced that he would not be returning for the 1977 season. He would return to Perth as captain coach of Claremont. Ken Fletcher took over as captain in 1977. Missing was Alan Noonan, who had headed the club goal-kicking 7 times. He would join Richmond. This would be the birth of the baby Bombers Mark I. Amongst the recruits, this 15-year-old from Dimboola.
You know, the Sullivans was very big in television. This is going back a long ways. But that was a big-time show. And Tom was heading off to war and I was heading off to Melbourne to play football, and my mum was crying and I wasn't sure if she was crying because I was heading off to Melbourne to play football. Tom was heading off to the war and she's still saying, look, are you sure you've got him a good family, you know, that he's going to move into? And they said, yes, Mrs. Watson, you know, everything's done, the deal's sweet, you know, everything's under control, you don't need to worry. And so we hopped in the car, going about 2 kilometres, and I said, you know, where's the little bastard going to stay?
I want to be part of a premiership side, and that's I reckon that's about the biggest thing every footballer aims to be, is part of a premiership side.
Wasted any time, and he's looking for Watson. Watson, the first game player for Essendon today.
Among the other youngsters, Paul Vanderhaar, Merv Neagle, Steve Torbett, Wayne Primmer and Shane Hurd. It was little wonder that Bill Stephen was so disappointed when he was replaced by assistant Barry Davis at the end of the 1977 season. The recruiting continued in 78. From South Melbourne came Terry Danaher, a youngster from Ungaree in New South Wales who'd been struggling at South Melbourne. In a deal that saw Neville Fields become a Swan, Essendon would get Terry and younger brother Neil.
It was untried, really. He was up at Assumption College at the time, finishing his final year of school, and I think that you know, it was just going to be a matter of time, because probably Neil, out of all the 4 boys, he had the most ability.
It was a year when Essendon journeyed to Moorabbin and faced the wrath of the wild men of footy. It was the day the Saints were branded as animals.
Ditchard had a go at Terry Carl and knocked him over the boundary line, and I'm sure the boundary umpire was going to report him, but I confronted him and he's thrown a couple of fists out and whacked me, and I got to the tribunal on the Monday, and first time there, Carl's got his own seat virtually with his name on the back, and I've sort of said, oh, yeah, he's hit me. And Carl's there saying, now, well, I've just did this, I've put my 2 hands up, I've just protected myself from this young guy, I can't. And they're all sort of saying, well, Carl, you know, that's all right, we understand you're not guilty.
By 1978, Van der Haar was one of the most sensational high marks in the game. His clash with Peter Knights in round 11, one of the most memorable ever.
I haven't seen him play a bad game. Knights from behind knocks the ball away from Van der Haar. Knights and Van der Haar, the 2 blondes.
In 1979, the Bombers would claw their way back up the ladder. There would be a return to the September action, a highly forgettable match against Fitzroy in the elimination final. The crowd was a poor 49,000. They saw Essendon kick only 5 goals and beat a hasty retreat from further action.
A team that probably resembled Dad's army. I mean, the prerequisite for being a member of this side was actually you had to have a broken limb or you had to have your knee in a cast. And I mean, it's little wonder we were belted in that game by Fitzroy.
Among the more controversial signings in the Davis reign were Crackers Keenan, the ruckman who more than adequately lived up to that frightful moniker, and fabulous Phil Carman. In 1980, Carman showed both sides of his enigmatic personality. Against Richmond, he was boisterous.
Yeah, it's playing tricks out there. Another mistake there by Dunn. Ball comes to Carman, a goal coming up. Lee in front. Jess kicked it in mid-air, picked up by Marsh. Snap forward, a goal umpire right underneath. In the front, score points. Toward Madden, couldn't take the mark. Well rowed by Carman. Carman caught in possession and will pay the penalty. Knocked on by Watson, great players. It's Carman. Gives it across to Donnell. And Donnell goes through for his third goal.
A fortnight later, he would figure in one of the most sensational incidents in football history when he journeyed to Moorabbin.
Match against St Kilda that the highly volatile Phil Carman clashed with boundary umpire Graham Carberry. Carman was reported in this incident for headbutting and striking boundary umpire Carberry and was also reported for striking St Kilda skipper Gary Sidebottom. Carman was found guilty of striking Sidebottom and headbutting Carberry and was suspended for 20 matches, the heaviest penalty since the war.
Well, I'll be probably away from the club for a week and just to have a bit of time off, and then I'll be back to commence training.
Phil, thinking back on it, have you any regrets about the whole incident?
Oh, a lot of regrets, yeah. I naturally feel very concerned for the club and particularly for Barry Davis, for the faith that he put in me. You know, he put in a lot of work to get me to the club, and I just feel as though I've let him down personally and also letting the club down.
Barry Davis announced that he would step down if the club did not make the finals in 1980. At 22, Simon Madden was already a 100-game veteran with 2 best and fairests to his name. He would replace Ken Fletcher as skipper. Injuries would dog the side all year. True to his word, Davis would retire. With him, the 264-game veteran Ken Fletcher. The club was undergoing radical change. The Colin Stubbs-led administration was replaced by a new team led by former star player Greg Sewell, and a new coach had been found. One who planned to stay for a long, long time. As far back as 1975, Essendon had been trying to lure Kevin Sheedy from Tigerland. The tough back pocket had played in 3 Richmond Premiership teams, and when he retired in 1979 had played 251 games.
I barracked for Essendon when I was a kid. I thought they were a fairly sort of shy club that didn't want to be anywhere near the front line of trying to get up the ladder again.
He had been sounded out to replace Tuddy after the 1975 season. He decided to play on. Now, at 33, after a season in the back office at Punt Road, he was ready for the challenge. Strangely, he would beat his great rival of the mid-80s, Alan Jeames, for the job.
I thought they were living dangerously picking a young person, but who had not coached, but probably, I think they'd done a bit of research on myself, and probably Alan's career at St Kilda was a pretty good career. He was always up in the finals, won a couple of grand finals.
His coaching debut was less than auspicious. With a side depleted with injury, the club lost 6 of its first 7. Sheedy looked seriously at pulling on the jumper.
I just got pretty frustrated. I mean, I was 32, 33 years of age. I was getting annoyed that we were just losing games, and probably foolishly I thought that it would have been a mistake. There's no doubt about that would have been an error.
He didn't have to worry. Starting with a massive win over Collingwood in round 8, the club won 15 in a row, a streak that had only been bettered in the Coleman glory days.
Has all the time in the world to look up forward. The big fella Madden, oh, he taps it down beautifully from Fowler. Fowler sets up the handball. Another one, they go in towards the open goal. This is Eustace. Goal.
In towards half forward, little Bahagia giving away 2'6" there. Madden the handball to Reid. Reid steadies onto the left boot. He goes straight through the middle and another one to Essendon.
Madden is the danger man. Great leap. He's paid it.
Along the way, a memorable victory in the Rich Escort Cup night series. This would be Essendon's first premiership, day or night, since 1965, and was just what we needed.
Snapshot for goal. I watch it. Goal. Folds, one of Essendon's best. Long kick from Folds. Hawker on the run. Over towards Danaher. He can go from there, and he's done it.
Tonight we had the 20 players on the field. It also goes to the 16 players who have played in the Escort Cups and did not represent us tonight. Also to the coach, Kevin Sheedy, who's put in a lot of work.
In round 20, Essendon staged one of the most remarkable comebacks in the dying minutes of the match against Carlton at Princes Park. The Blues 26 points up with 10 minutes to play before Neil Danaher inspired a huge fight back.
So it's 5 points the difference. Never runs the ball. Taps it on, he's got it. And the Bombers back into attack again. Up she goes to Danaher. Oh, the Bomber crowd are going mad. It could be the dress rehearsal for the grand final of 1981 as Neil Danaher comes in for the kick that could possibly win the game. And he's put it through and the Bombers have hit the front.
When you're actually in the play, and I would have looked up the scoreboard at certain stages, and we knew we were a few down, but we were making a bit of a late rush, and I thought we were going to get there.
A week later, Danaher would break down with a knee injury.
Ruined the career of Neil as a player. Probably it made him resolute to end up being a coach, which is now his first year, 1998. It's 17 years later.
For the second time in 3 years, Essendon would face Fitzroy in the elimination final. As in 1979, the Bombers would lose, ending a magnificent run in the most frustrating fashion.
Andrews trying to play the ball in front, gets it cleverly to Hurd. Hurd snaps it goal, into the goal square, goes.
Another elimination final. This time, North, another defeat. Justin Madden in his last game for the club.
Knocked down to Phil Cracker. A snap at the goals. Will it make the distance? Will it bounce? Let's see what happens. It goes through. A goal. Goal number 3 to Phil Cracker.
We were starting to be seen as this team that choked when they got to the finals.
Gone from the club in 1983 were Max Crowe and Justin Madden, both state players, both keen to move on. To the club came a big kid with a huge future. His name Paul Salmon, and within a year he'd be a megastar. There would be a new captain, Terry Danaher, laconic, gritty, tough and inspirational. Sheedy attacked the umpires over their treatment of Merv Neagle. The club had a fiery dust-up with Hawthorn. Big Roger Merritt was labelled a hitman on the eve of the finals, and the club stormed towards the grand final.
King, 30 metres out, into the goal square, goal coming up to Danaher from 1.5 metres.
People were talking about as being a good side, then there was still some sort of, there was still doubters out there amongst people, but all of a sudden they started to change their opinion of us.
First Carlton in the elimination final. No thought of choking on this occasion. It was Essendon's first finals win after 6 straight losses stretching back to 1968.
Former Richmond captain, the Essendon skipper has the mark, 50 metres out from goal. Deserves a goal and he's done it! Great play by the Bombers. Oh, Watson, great attempt at marking. Van der Haar off the ground. And a goal! Oh, he'll be signed up by Aston Villa, I think. Bill's lost his headband now.
Yeah, well, that's, that's one of the worst things you can do to the flying doormat, take his headband off.
After defeating Fitzroy in the first semi-final, the Bombers murdered North Melbourne by a record 86 points and set the scene for a grand final showdown against Hawthorn.
Tapped away, it's good. Oh, little Williams, clear. Has his running shot, but he's grabbed it. Back to Ezard. A snap at goal. What's the result? It's good. It's a goal.
just the fact that we'd made the grand final, the fact that we're going to play in the grand final, was probably enough for us at that stage. We probably couldn't handle the fact that we had to then front up to the toughest game of the whole series. It would be the first September meeting between the two clubs, and for Essendon, one of the most forgettable finals ever. Writing in The Sun, Lou Richards described Essendon's performance and 83-point loss as the worst he'd seen in 40 years of football.
Oh, there's a chance now for little Ezra. The snap and goal. He's right. He's got it.
Underground pass to Van der Haar on his own. Van der Haar on the goal square, down at his first goal.
Forward position, the back fly. Matthews steps the ball down at Tuck. And Tuck has a pot shot at the goals. But will it make the distance? It'll be a goal. Coming out of the pack has swamped the ball. A hand pass to Russell Green out there at half forward. A long kick towards the goals. I think he might have put this one through. He has. What a goal.
Hurd, oh, beautiful one-hander, just not completing it enough. Matthews, a shot at goal. That's a jam.
Understand that our disappointing performance is going to have to be used as a catalyst to get back in 1984, and in the end, within 2 years, we reversed a losing result of 13 or 14 goals within 2 years of turning around to a result of a plus 13 or 14 goals.
The biggest name in football was Paul Salmon, and in 1984 he couldn't do a thing wrong. He polled 3 Brownlow votes in each of his first 3 games of the year. He was sensational.
I think he's grabbed this mark. I think he's going to pay it. What about that for a mark?
Long, Andrews jostling for front spot. Beautifully marked by Salmon. Olds, who goes high towards full forward. Salmon's got the height.
The 19-year-old had kicked 60 in the first 12 rounds, kicked 5 for Victoria against South Australia, and was on the way of emulating John Coleman's feats of 1949.
So Salmon folds up towards the square. Salmon again. One hit by Salmon.
It was against Collingwood in round 13 that his season ended tragically.
Downey hasn't moved for a while, Pete. He's really stunned down there.
That was, well, very bad luck for Essendon.
Jeff had come through from my blind side. I didn't even see him. And all I remember is my leg scissoring around him and the knee just going all jelly-like, quite painful, and getting carried off and receiving the warm applause of the Collingwood faithful.
Some coaches say, well, I'm with the next player, but I mean, the kid had done everything. He took all before him in the game. He was kicking goal after goal. And of course, to lose a young champion like that very early, we just lost Neil Danaher a year or 2 before. So, you know, knee reconstructions were really starting to hurt our club badly. And, you know, my belief was to give him and get him back that confidence to believe he can play again. And he got up and he never let us down really in grand final. So he was very, very good for us.
With 18 wins, Essendon would top the ladder. After losing to Hawthorn in the second semi-final, then defeating Collingwood in the preliminary final, the Bombers had earned another crack at Hawthorn for the flag.
You had a coach who was, you know, working at his peak, I think, and you had a very good group of players that really gelled together as a team.
If Sheedy was still smarting from the embarrassment of the 83 debacle, worse was to come. Hawthorn jumped to a commanding lead. By three-quarter time, Essendon trailed by 23 points.
Byrne tries to come out of the pack. It's Williams sending the Bombers back into attack. Up it goes there. Baker taps the ball on. Oh, beautiful play. Goes for a goal. And I think they've hit the front. Yes, they're in front. A point in front. That's 4 goals to Baker.
4 goals in 8 minutes.
Got into the back of McCarthy. Recovers well. Goes for hand pass to the blonde-headed Harvey. A kick up there towards the full forward position. Van der Haar knocked on. There's a go now for Weston. He's put it through for a goal. What a match winner this guy's been at centre-half forward. 92.
Donnell knocks it onto Merritt, or trying to find Merritt, but Watson's there instead. They're running right away. There's another one. If he's accurate, I think he's dobbed it. It's Essendon's flag. No doubt about it.
Into this quarter by just on 35 minutes. There's the siren.
It was the moment we'd all been waiting for. 92,000 saluted the premiers. It was pandemonium in the rooms. Former greats like Jack Clark and Ken Fraser had been there before. Then it was back to the Southern Cross. More celebrations, more speeches.
Now, you're going to have to bear with me a little bit tonight because I've been such a boring person at these sort of functions. I know how I can destroy a night very quickly. Very difficult to be an extrovert coach in a conservative community.
The one we had waited for started just like we'd imagined.
Gee whiz, hang on, I'm a better speech maker than that. Really, it was just a wonderful feeling to run off the ground and to realise we've sort of grabbed the premiership for '84.
It's hard to imagine, but 1985 was even better. The club would lose only 3 games. For the 3rd year in a row, Hawthorn and Essendon would slug it out. In 1985, literally.
Find the fighters there. Matthews and Watson. Look at them piling up. This is the best I've ever seen for in a grand final, Bob. I can't recall. Look, God. Oh, golly, Peter. Talk about stacks on the field.
This would be one of the most one-sided grand finals in history. A lopsided 78-point win, highlighted by 11 goals in the last quarter.
He hasn't missed that one. That will seal it well and truly for the 85 flag, and the Essendon players know that. In towards the 10-metre square, Salmon and Mew, no mark for either player. Baker, left foot snapshot, that'll be close. He's got it, I think. That's a goal. Great play.
Hanley taps it on into the hands of Vanderhaar. A long hand pass over to Harvey. This could be a goal. The little fella straightens up and fires. It's a goal for the Bombers again. He can put the premiership flag in the bag now.
Harvey's kick up towards trying to find Vanderhaar. Chance for Billy Duckworth to score a goal, and he does. And Billy's pretty happy about it. Big pack of players down there. It rebounds to Watson. He has a ping at the goals and has put it through for another one. It's academic, of course.
Merritt taking his time. Lets it go. And that is a goal. It's a goal number 5. So it's 22 goals, 146 Essendon.
Danaher at the back. Picked up by Walsh. Scoops it out. In fact, almost throws it out to Welshaw, but the umpire, that was a throw. Clark long kick, looking for Vanderhaar. Duckworth. Ezard. Somebody hit him on the head, the ball. Got a good turn of speed. The little redhead has a shot at the goals again, and he's done it. Great goal.
Williams going for goal number 2. And, of course, a big chance to put him 72 points in front. And that's right. That's right through the middle for a goal. He's driving it up to Big Salmon. Can he grab this one? The pack fly. There's too many. That could be Harvey kicking this one. He's got it through.
I'm just proud to be part of it because in '85, I just felt we were just that confident, you know, like even from the word go, from the start of the season, that we just had that probably a little bit of arrogance about us, that we thought we could just grab a game, you know, and win a game from wherever. You know, if we were down at any particular stage, we could sort of just get up and grab it back.
And that was a healthy arrogance. I think it comes from confidence. It's not over arrogance, but it's a real belief in yourself and a real confidence in your ability and the ability of the people around you. And I think the club at that stage was at its strongest.
Such was the power with which Essendon won the premiership in 1985 that Lee Matthews called it the greatest football team of all time. While the players were enjoying their celebrations, the club was fending off approaches for coach Kevin Sheedy and star ruckman Simon Madden from Sydney. Merv Neagle would accept the offer, reputedly worth $395,000 for 3 years.
I can remember Barry Capriano getting on the phone because once I got the offer, you had to report back to the club within 24, 48 hours that the offer had been made. I remember Barry Capriano getting on the phone and he said, "Hi, Simon, you know what I'm talking, you know what I'm ringing about?" And his voice broke as he said, "Are the figures right?" And I just said, "Look, you know," and I said, "Well, yeah, they could be right, but they might not, you know. I mean, I know what I'm being offered." And I just said to the club, I said, "Look," and he said, "We can't match them." I said, "I don't expect the club to match them." And I just said, "Look, show me you want to keep me."
There would be no hat tricks of premierships. In fact, 1986 would be a year of some highs plenty of low.
Customer, as Essendon's Mark Harvey discovered.
Still going too.
While this bump by Ross Glendinning on Bill Duckworth enraged Bomber fans.
Glendinning, did he get hit? That was fair, Jack.
And a disappointing and frustrating elimination final defeat by a point at the hands of Fitzroy. Round 18, 1988, and a sensation. Dermot Burton and Bill Duckworth proved to be two of the least likely footy romantics.
Be unfriendly. And, well, there's a bit of humour in football. They look like they're enjoying themselves.
Just to prove his love, Dermot then ran through our huddle. Strange how Dermot's path would cross ours so often in the decade. In 1989, the name of Watson was added to the honour board of club captains, and there would be other notable changes. Simon Madden would eclipse Dick Reynolds' club record. Madden, in game number 321 and still with a way to go, was carried on the shoulders of his teammates after the game against North. It was our 8th win on end.
I mean, I started at 16, played till I was 34. Players aren't going to start at 16 anymore. Very rarely will they will, and I'm not sure if they'll be able to make it to 34. Whether people get up around there again. So, I mean, that, you know, be able to break his record and then pass some other great footballers to end up with that list, yeah, I mean, it's a great achievement, sensational.
Essendon was back in the finals, back as a threat after 2 horrific years.
Past him, Watson shows pace. Great play by Tim Watson, that's the sort of thing he can do. And he shoots it towards goal. What a reply.
Would meet Blight's Geelong. Would meet them without Salmon, who had injured his ankle, and Vanderhaar, who'd been suspended for striking Greg Deere. In a landmark case, had the decision overturned after he claimed to have been concussed at the time. This would be a humbling turnaround. The Cats recovering from that qualifying final loss of 13 goals to win by 6 goals.
No one picked us to make the finals in '89. So it was actually a pretty good year to come back out of the doldrums in many ways, and we got up there, and Blighty, I think, was coach. I think Malcolm was coach, and we had a very, very good win, and they turned it around. It was one of the very disappointing years.
For Sheedy, some salve for the pain in 1989. And a first for this bloke, some silver for the sideboard. Essendon's 3rd night title in a decade under Sheeds.
It was rugged. It had a lot of qualities that a grand final's all about. It was a fast game, it was a hard game, and you know, towards the end of the game, and at the end, you really know you've been in a grand final. And you know, all credit goes to the team. They really put up a great show.
In round 6, that fellow Watson played his 250th game. By round 12, the club was celebrating its 1800th league game. And in round 19, history was made when the blockbuster against Collingwood was televised live on 7 into Melbourne, an AFL first. With top spot secure, Sheedy let his emotions show. He named all the Danahers for the final game of the year against St Kilda. Chris, Terry, Anthony and Neil. The first time 4 brothers had played in a league game.
It was great. Get out there with the 4 of them. I can still remember running through the banner. I've never even sort of running through the grand final banner last year, but probably not. I didn't know what I was doing. I was in, you know, there's a lot of things happening then, but it just felt great running out there with 3 brothers.
It had been a year when the club had again been rocked by injuries. The boys didn't take it lying down.
Very tough decision, Bruce.
I think Dermot caught one then.
Meldrum in front, can't gather it. Bassett, a crude tackle. Meldrum, down he goes from an elbow. And Meldrum, poor play by Somerville. And the book is coming out.
A 10-goal win over the Eagles in the preliminary final set up another crack at the Magpies in the grand final.
Look at the gather. The right foot snap. This is a miraculous kick.
Diving on the football, the Collingwood defence trying to keep it in. Kick by Watson, up towards full forward.
No mark, punched away. Now Kickett gets his right foot to the ball. It's bounced through. Miraculous goal by Kickett.
Things fell into place for Collingwood. They played their best football of the year throughout that final series, and we just didn't get anything happening. And I remember the Thursday night before the grand final, and I just couldn't believe the lethargic way we set about our training. And I called the players together and sort of spoke to them about the fact that, look, you know, this is the most important game for us for the year. But it was just as if we're just a tired unit.
The game will be remembered by many people for many things. No one will forget the brawl. 6 players reported, 13 charges. Terry Danaher would be rubbed out for 12 weeks. Buick for the 91 night series. Vanderhaar for a couple, as was Kieran Spawn.
And usually this does happen early on in a grand final, not at the quarter-time break.
I don't know what happened with, why the melee started. Eddie, obviously the guys got a bit heated up there, and we were a long way away from the action. One of my teammates came out of the ground, and Gavin jumped into him, and I didn't like what I saw there. Thought it was a bit unfair, and I sort of just let out my frustrations, I suppose.